Alright, so I'm going to deconstruct an internet article entitled, "No, you are not an atheist, you are a nihilist," penned by someone going under the handle The Ethical Skeptic. Link to the article in the description box. Well, I've read it over, and right away my first impression is that this is some anally wounded atheist who got his panties in a wad because someone probably called atheism a religion, which he now wants to distance himself from by deflecting it all onto nihilism, which, by his estimation, is the real culprit. And while he's at that, it seems he also wants to dump all the arrogant, mocking, intolerant, pig-headed, bigoted, juvenile bullying behaviors that have become so synonymous with modern atheism, especially on the internet, into the lap of nihilism as well. Either that, or he's an undercover theist, or a former theist that has a similar MO. So here it is again, folks. More use of nihilism as a scapegoat for things that it has nothing to do with. So let's jump right into it. The part of the ethical skeptic will be played by a bot who will deliver philosophy in a posh English accent, which I know a lot of you will enjoy. It'll break up the monotony of just hearing one voice. After all, I know how much my voice intimidates you and makes you feel insecure. But anyway, let's jump right into it.
Nihilists, no, you cannot surreptitiously reinvent atheism to your liking, and pretend then to speak on behalf of the rest of us. I'm an atheist, but I reject being force-fed nihilism every bit as vehemently as being force-fed theism. You are simply going to have to find some other way to finally appear acceptable to the world. Your religion has already been well defined as distinct from atheism for millennia. Embrace it, be it, live it. Don't hide behind me.
This seems to be an attempt to lay down the groundwork for a premise that simply isn't true. Nihilism wasn't even an idea invented to hang a banner on or promote. It was a term devised by theism to malign the rejection of theism. And accordingly, don't get some wild ideas that atheism is some distinct or separate classification from nihilism. It isn't. That's like saying a jacket has some separate distinction from clothing. All nihilists are atheists by default, but in the eyes of the nihilist, not the other way around. Except for in the eyes of theism, in which case all atheists are automatically nihilist. By rejecting the concept of God, you are negating a very significant, meaningful aspect of life, and hence are nihilist by this very notion alone. Now, modern-day detachment, of which now I do spearhead, is an evolving dynamic which has taken back the term nihilist, refurbished it, and is attempting to sharpen its intentions and ameliorate its image. As far as atheism is concerned, well, fuck atheism. Really. Fuck atheism. Now I understand the meaning behind the quote, "Nihilism, it's like atheism for people who aren't pussies." But fuck that quote also. Nihilism isn't trying to reinvent atheism, speak for atheists, pretend to represent atheism, or is trying to force-feed atheism anything. Nihilism is going down its own path, and doesn't need atheism to do so, and is not too terribly concerned with appearing acceptable to the world. I think this is more of a case of you trying to do just that. Make atheism more acceptable to the world. by casting all of your disgusting behaviors onto nihilism and then pretend that they were never yours. You are the only one here desperately trying to define these distinctions, even though you claim that these distinctions have already been well defined for millennia. If true, that would be a bit unnecessary, no. But I don't even think it's a valid point, but more of a snarky, quippy device that facilitates a clever way to call nihilism a religion. So take a look in the mirror and stop deflecting. Hide behind you. Even though atheism is nihilistic in much the same way as a cow is beef, nihilism doesn't need atheism in any way whatsoever. Why don't you stop trying to hide your apparent shame behind nihilism in your pandering attempt to butter theism's buns?
If you proselytize angrily about the non-existence of every difficult-to-observe or personally disdained phenomena, all that is fine and I respect your right to hold beliefs, but please do not sell that personal religion as atheism, nor science. To call this religion naturalism, secularism or material monism implies that your dogma is founded upon coherent definition, measure and rigorous empirical study, Wittgenstein erroneous claims to science, about which in reality you cannot boast.
Most of that is just plain stupid, as is most of the article. So nihilism is angry. What? Just because you say so? Nihilism doesn't proselytize because there's nothing to convert to. Nihilism also doesn't have a problem with any difficult-to-observe phenomena, nor personally disdains any such possibility, nor is trying to sell anyone on forming attachments to content. It isn't nihilism that is doing any of that. But again, this does sound more like the atheism we have all come to know very well. And atheists are the only ones that I know that like to refer to themselves as naturalists or secularists or monomaterialists. And what dogma are you referring to exactly? Among other things, if nihilism is not invested into context, then surely it must also not be invested into anything contextual, like dogma. When it comes to phenomenal content, I'm sure science, atheism, and nihilism can all agree that certain things can be said to exist, certain things can be said not to exist, and certain things are uncertain. When things are uncertain, nothing can be conclusively believed or not believed until more evidence is gathered. This would probably apply more to the cutting edge of discoveries and new areas of exploration. When it comes to something like God, however, we've had thousands of years of research, and based upon this empirical study and attempted measuring of an aspect that supposedly has been coherently defined by theism itself, there is no such deity. And it's safe to say that this is the case, until such time that it is proven otherwise. You got that, Charlie? Until such time that it is proven otherwise. In whichever way that might be, provided it can be conveyed and demonstrated by way of actual experience. Is this closing the door all the way shut on God? No, but for now, this is the approach that should be taken, for this is the way knowledge works. You don't build knowledge on what could be, might be, or on what one day might possibly be. You build knowledge on what is, and then modify accordingly, based on anything that develops.
The atheist, agnostic and agnostic all allow for potentialities, they lack belief. The nihilist, atheist, does not allow for any of this, a fundamentalist belief set, employing science as an apologetic, a religion in the purest definition of the word.
No, wrong again, and poorly stated. Nihilism is the philosophy of nothingness, and nothingness is pure potentiality itself. So how in the hell could nihilism not allow for potentialities? And as far as lacking belief, nihilism is hanging right up there with the best of them. In fact, nihilism dwarfs all others when it comes to a lack of belief. Something is either existentially true, or it isn't. There is never any need for belief with nihilism. Either something is self-evident, or it isn't. And when something is self-evident, there is absolutely no need to believe in it in order to interact with it. Gravity is gravity. It doesn't matter what I believe or disbelieve about it. It's still gonna be gravity. It doesn't matter if I'm arrogantly, pig-headedly, stubbornly insisting gravity doesn't exist. It still exists regardless. It's self-evident and can be verified empirically. Belief never even makes it into the equation. So, understanding this, there's no way you can accuse nihilism of being a fundamental belief set, since it doesn't even deal in beliefs. Nor is there any need to employ science as an apologetic. Whatever the fuck that means.
I occasionally explain when someone sincerely inquires of me just why I chose the path of agnostic atheism. I clarify to them that I lack an allowance for God in my personal philosophy. There is a reason why many philosophers regard agnosticism to be the only true pathway to atheism. The discipline of thinking inside agnosticism affords one the ability to spot self-pretense, and then proceed calmly and wisely on to the next step in their chosen path of philosophy. This form of ontological skepticism does not dictate a path, only a discipline of thinking. It allows one to discern the contrast between ethical struggle and arrogant pretense.
Are you kidding me? You lack an allowance for gods in your personal philosophy? What is this? Lawyers speak. So carefully trying to avoid making any kind of self-authoritative statement, because after all it might offend someone. I never really thought philosophy would be a place for euphemisms. No, it's not that I don't believe in God. It's just that I personally lack an allowance for God in my individual philosophy. No. Theists are not allowed at the philosophy table. They got a theology table for that over there, not over here. Over here, we are concerned about the philosophy of reality, not fantasy. We create fantasy over here. Over there, they adhere to it. And I don't see how being agnostic has afforded you the ability to spot self-pretense when you've been such a demonizing prick to nihilism and are so blatantly trying to make something that is not the case appear true. Nihilism is ontologically skeptical, but doesn't try to dictate any path either, nor any discipline of thinking for that matter. Take whatever path you want and think however you want. It's not going to change the temporary aspects of functionality, of which one cannot deny being aware of firsthand and foremost. With clear seeing into that which is always so, there isn't any ethical struggle. Wherein and of what? It goes back to something you said earlier. You reject being force-fed. Remember, therein should be a clear understanding. And as it applies to you, it applies to all others. And as for arrogant pretense, please, where else is there such certainty of ethical righteousness and conceited deception than theism and atheism? Come on, you're gonna have to do better than that.
Nihilism, in stark contrast, is not simply a belief that life is devoid of all meaning. This is a special exemption plead solely on an extreme framing of existential nihilism, the notion that life possesses an empty set of factors of intrinsic meaning or value. While this is a very commonly misunderstood sense of the word today, herein we recognize, as does most of philosophy, the nihilists' innate freedom to declare the applicability and definition of meaning for themselves. Meaning is derived through our interaction with the world around us, yes, but more importantly through the influences we receive through the experiences of others. This renders all extraordinary claims to meaning, 1% research and 99% rumor. An ethical skeptic understands this. To call this religion naturalism, secularism or material monism implies that the beliefs are based upon coherent definition, measure and rigorous empirical study, implications of which in reality it cannot boast.
This is a bunch of convoluted mishmash. It's not a matter of belief. If indeed we accept the reality based on evidence or a lack thereof, that there isn't any external objectified sky daddy out there, then certainly it follows that any value, meaning, purpose, or narrative that can be established will have an existential foundation and not otherwise. And this reality isn't an indication that life is devoid of all meaning, but that simply meaning is a subjective application, not objective. There is meaning, but it is meaning that is supplied by the individual. Simple. It isn't a special exemption since there isn't an alternative that can be mentioned, nor is it an extreme framing of existential nihilism. What's so extreme about it? That it dares to leave these blanks to be filled by an individual instead of by dogmatic assertions. I don't think anyone needs to be informed that meaning is derived from both interaction with the world and from influence of experiences with interactions with others. So what is it that you implore is being missed? What kind of extraordinary claims about meaning would not be examined for traces of reality if put forth? That meaning is actually a translucent ghost that haunts the brains of sentient beings? I don't think discovering the reality behind that claim would consist of a configuration of 1% research and 99% rumor. Extraordinary claims about ontological existentiality are usually what is 99% rumor. And no one is trying to block research. But most of these extraordinary claims can be attributable to one thing or another based upon the research and knowledge that we have gathered thus far. And even though none of it is written in stone, the current accumulated body of knowledge can be assumed to be the temporary aspect of functionality until the evidence of circumstances dictate otherwise. Extraordinary claims. Come on, stop hunting inventory for a golden egg. Most intellectually honest atheists and nihilists are okay with uncertainty, mystery, the unknowable, and nothingness, and base their assumed navigational approach to reality founded on their own personal empiricism and the common consensus of human knowledge, which is derived from coherent definitions, measure, and rigorous experiential study.
Nihilism is a form of rational solipsism. It features a pathological lack of the allow for virtue borne by those who are scientifically and skeptically open-minded. It relies upon its intimidating spectre of pluralistic ignorance to underpin its boast as to what scientists collectively think and believe. It is only what the nihilist has intellectually chosen to regard as meaningful, which is indeed meaningful, and their framing must be required of anyone who is regarded as rational. Sound familiar? Most philosophers regard nihilism in this way, as nihilist romanticism and not as constituting a personal philosophy viewing our reality as devoid of all meaning. The latter definition is easy to state, hence its iconic use as a one-liner, but is of farcical impracticality, aside from its use as a tool for personal exclusion pleading, inside philosophical discussion.
So now nihilism is a form of rational solipsism. Seems you paint nihilism to represent many different shades of implied negative undertones. Unfortunately, you don't go into detail about what you are implying. You just throw around labels and hope something sticks. Solipsism, another label used to malign and smear. Even though rational solipsism represents the most intellectually honest position imaginable. The fact of the matter is that your own awareness is the only thing you can know to be for sure. Everything and anything that could come out of your pie hole concerning anything further is merely speculation and assumption. So this is really where the event horizon of truth and belief is assembled. Much like the notion that extraordinary claims about reality hold the burden of proof, so does, too, any assertion that projects beyond your own awareness. You want to say something additional to the fact that you are aware of an experience of a reality, that in fact reality is more than just a projection of your mind? Then the burden of proof is on you. And who are you to accuse solipsism of a lack of an allow for virtue when you just got through saying you lack an allowance for gods in your personal philosophy? That doesn't sound very open-minded. Solipsism has a very open-minded stance and will allow for anything, as long as it can be demonstrated. And oh yeah, notice how the word demon is in the word demonstrated. Shows you the fear in people via the crypto-semantic implication of having to back up their bullshit with something tangible. And as for an intimidating specter of pluralistic ignorance to speak for what scientists collectively think or believe, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Who said anything about pluralism? The nihilist and the solipsist both know empirically that there is one fundamental principle which manifests the appearance of all things. It isn't pluralism, nor dualism, nor even monoism, but closer to non-duality and pure potentiality, which isn't a substance, or an appearance, or any other thing of inventory that can be referenced. You see, the problem is that people are beginning to know for themselves that reality is a product of awareness, and that a major part of this knowing reveals that all phenomenal aspects of reality are all included in this projection, and that the sustainment of illusion, and hence delusion, pivots on the crucial misunderstanding of this configuration. This is what illusion does. This is how delusion is maintained. All of which you are an enabler. Scientists can individually or collectively think and believe whatever they want. It's of no concern to someone who is awake. They already know that just by a scientist pointing outwards with an assertion is looking in the wrong place. And the so-called framing of this truth, even though it obviously isn't mandatory, as evidenced by the fact that almost all people externalize and then chase after their projections, isn't an item on the supermarket shelf. Either you get it or you don't. Either you have empirically discovered this to be the case, or you are still sifting through layers of appearances. It's not a matter of opinion or a belief. It's experiential evidence. If we can separate opinion from facts and clearly know the difference, then there won't be any confusion. The framework of reality has certain facts that are applicable. Until such time, they are no longer applicable. And imports, such as meaning, value, purpose, or narrative, are supplied by the existential agency. This is a fact, not a ploy of argumentation to bolster rationality. If any of these imports are provided by anything other than a subject, then please put forth the case so it can be considered. But until then, it's safe to assume what is apparent, clear, and present. Yet this isn't an indication that anything is written in stone. And you know what's really laughable? Is this expression romantic nihilism. As if nihilism has one romantic bone in its body. No. Nihilism seeks to deconstruct all romanticism, as it is yet another ensnaring device used to stick the attention on inventory. The romanticism is found in notions of mythology, gods, or the wondrous universe. It doesn't matter if it's atheist, Gnostic, agnostic, ignostic, or pantheist. The attempt to draw the attention away from its own source is the romantic red herring. Reality is devoid of all objective meaning. If you claim that this truth is impractical, well, then you are in for some trouble. As would anyone struggling in the waves of a mighty river while claiming the currents are impractical.
Atheism is a lack of belief, nihilism is a belief. By attempting to draw the demarcation between nihilism and atheism to be too inclusive, we have introduced a Pandora's box of confusion, manifested today around what it means to be an atheist. Nihilism is a dogmatic counter-belief about a myriad of disdained subjects. Just as is the case with theism, it is an exercise in extrapolating conclusions into domains where science has not really been. In contrast, atheism is a lack of belief about deities only.
Rehash. Incorrect, misleading, insincere rehash. No one is trying to re-illustrate the separation of nihilism and atheism as actually something more of a total comprehensive package. Nihilism is indifferent to atheism. Nihilism has no use for belief or lack of belief in any way whatsoever. You seem to be using word games to avoid the idea that you are engaging in a disbelief, which is a silly notion in and of itself. Either something is self-evident or it isn't. We don't construct labels for all the many different things that are not self-evident. I don't need a title for every single non-evident factor. The fact that you do have a title shows that it's a little more than just a lack of belief. It's a belief that no gods exist, dressed in a lack of belief wrapping paper. Pink unicorns with wings are not self-evident, and therefore isn't even an item of consideration to reject, even if there was a group of people who believed in them. If they are not self-evident, then there is literally no point in establishing a position of a lack of a belief in a pink-winged unicorn. If someone has the need to make this into a position, then obviously they are doing a little more than just acknowledging what is or isn't self-evident. They are going out of their way to make it known they disbelieve. Otherwise, there's no reason to even address it. And this is one of the many unsavory things I find to be the case about atheism. That it extends legitimacy to theism simply by establishing a contrary position to theism. As if theism is the center of all attention and the standard of all consideration that all philosophies must dance around. No way. This is exactly why atheism is theism's bitch. For it doesn't even have its own identity independent of theism. So don't get it twisted. Atheism is disbelief in an inventory item. Nihilism is the subtraction of the investment into inventory items. This isn't a dogmatic counter-belief against any disdained subject. This is simply a lack of an investment, or the subtraction of an investment into inventory. This isn't a conclusion, but more of an existential mode of being, based on what is currently self-evident. The only ones who extrapolate towards a conclusion are those that invest into inventory. Those that explore awareness, the only aspect of which you know to be for sure, and of which, without, you wouldn't even be in a position to make a consideration, understand the utility of existentiality and have no need for the novelty of belief. And if you are waiting for material science to give you answers about this domain and ignore avenues for which you can probe it yourself, you will be waiting forever. So because you are playing around with semantics, this somehow makes you more of a sincere ethical skeptic? Maintaining a lack of an allow for isn't very open-minded as you try to make it out to be. How can you be someone who is seriously deliberating the issue of God if you have a lack of an allow for as part of your supposed open-mindedness? But this shouldn't even be outlined as an exercise of deliberating God. This is an exercise of determining the nature of reality. To look beyond this is to gloss over what is most evident and primary, to explore areas of speculation, operating under a default assumption that awareness and the way by which reality is assembled is unimportant, or a byproduct of inventory, of which wouldn't even be recognizable as such without an existential agency. And when it comes to this exploration, nihilism doesn't instruct. It points. So you go ahead and believe or disbelieve anything you want. Nihilism has no use for belief. Nihilism guides its way towards the truth by way of subtracting investments that are rooted in the false. Not by getting stuck in a mirror and endlessly masturbating with arrangements of content.